The cabin was already tense before the doors closed, the kind of quiet tension that settled into the air like recycled oxygen. Passengers shuffled down the aisle with forced patience, bumping elbows, muttering apologies they didn't mean. Overhead bins slammed shut. A baby cried somewhere near the back. The plane smelled of coffee, metal, and impatience. Malik Johnson stepped into the narrow aisle with a calm expression that had been practiced his entire life. Calm kept trouble away, or at least delayed it. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, simple but expensive, the kind that didn't beg for attention. A leather briefcase hung from his hand. He moved with quiet confidence, scanning seat numbers until he reached 3C. Business class, window seat. He placed his bag carefully under the seat and settled in, exhaling softly. Another flight, another city, another meeting where he would have to prove he belonged in the room. Across the aisle, a man in his late 40s watched him sit down. The man wore a wrinkled blazer, open collar, and the expression of someone permanently offended by the world. His knee bounced aggressively as he stared. Malik felt it without looking. He always did. Eyes had weight. Judgment had gravity. A flight attendant passed, smiling professionally, checking seat belts. Malik returned the smile with a nod. He pulled out his phone, skimming emails. Numbers, contracts, schedules, familiar ground, safe ground. That was when the man across the aisle spoke. "Hey," he said, voice sharp enough to cut through the low hum of the cabin. "You're in my seat." Malik looked up slowly. "I don't think so," he replied evenly. "This is 3C. That's my seat." The man insisted, louder now, attracting attention. "I paid for business class." "So did I," Malik said, holding up his boarding pass. The man barely glanced at it. "No offense," he said, leaning into the aisle, "but this section isn't for poppy people like you." The words didn't land softly. They never did. A few passengers froze. A woman to Rose's back widened her eyes. Someone pretended to scroll on their phone. Malik felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the old anger knocking politely, asking to be let in. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Malik asked. The man scoffed. "You know what I mean? I fly every week. I know who sits up here." Malik smiled faintly, the kind of smile that had disarmed boardrooms and unsettled men who mistook his silence for weakness. "Sir," he said, "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The man stood abruptly, blocking the aisle. "Get out of my seat." A flight attendant appeared instantly, trained to spot disruption like a shark sensed blood. "Is there a problem here?" she asked. "Yes," the man said quickly. "This guy is in my seat." She turned to Malik. "May I see your boarding pass, sir?" Malik handed it over without hesitation. She checked it, nodded, and handed it back. "He's in the correct seat." The man laughed, sharp and humorless. "You're telling me he paid for this seat?" "Yes," she said firmly. The man crossed his arms. "I want a supervisor." Murmurs spread. Phones tilted subtly. Malik sat back, hands folded, heart pounding despite his calm exterior. He'd been here before. Different plane. Same script. Another flight attendant arrived. Then a supervisor. The man repeated his complaint, embellishing it with exaggerated gestures and wounded pride. Malik listened silently, counting his breaths. 1, 2, 3. "Don't react. Don't give them what they expect." "Sir," the supervisor said at last, "your seat is 4D, one row back." The man froze. He looked down at his boarding pass. His face flushed red, then darker. He glanced at Malik, eyes burning with humiliation and something uglier. "Well," he muttered, "easy mistake." Malik met his gaze. "Not really," he said quietly. The man scoffed again. "Whatever. Enjoy it while it lasts." He moved away, bumping Malik's arm deliberately as he passed. The supervisor apologized softly. Malik nodded, though the apology wasn't really for him. It was for the disruption, for the inconvenience, not for the insult. As the plane taxied, Malik stared out the window. Clouds gathered like witnesses. His reflection stared back faintly in the glass, eyes tired, jaw tight. He thought of his father, who had taught him to stay composed when the world tried to provoke him. He thought of his mother, who had taught him his worth was not negotiable. Half an hour into the flight, turbulence hit, the seatbelt sign chimed, drinks rattled. Malik barely noticed. His mind replayed the confrontation on Lou. The man's certainty. the casual cruelty. The way the cabin had gone quiet, waiting to see how he would behave. A soft voice broke his thoughts. "Sir?" He turned. A young flight attendant stood beside him, hesitant. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry about earlier." "Thank you," Malik said. "I appreciate that." She smiled, relieved, and moved on. The rest of the flight passed quietly. The man from 4D avoided eye contact, staring aggressively at his tray table. Malik worked, typed, planned, productivity as armor. When the plane landed, passengers stood impatiently, grabbing bags. The aisle clogged. Malik waited, unhurried. As he stepped into the aisle, the man from 4D suddenly spoke again, low enough to be private. "You know," he said, "people like you are always playing the victim." Malik paused. He turned slowly, meeting the man's eyes. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. "No," Molly said calmly. "People like me are just tired of pretending this doesn't happen." The man opened his mouth, then closed it. Malik stepped past him and walked off the plane. In the jet bridge, sunlight filtered through glass walls. Malik breathed deeper. Each step felt lighter. He wasn't shaking. He wasn't angry anymore. He felt clear. At baggage claim, a woman approached him, middle-aged, kind eyes. "I just wanted you to know," she said. "I saw what happened. You handled it with grace." "Thank you," Malik said sincerely. She nodded. "My son is black. I hope he grows up with your strength." Malik swallowed hard. "I hope he grows up in a world where he doesn't need it." Outside the airport, cars lined up, horns honking. Life moved forward, indifferent but persistent. Malik adjusted his jacket and stepped into the crowd, carrying not just a briefcase, but the quiet resilience of someone who refused to shrink. Behind him, another flight arrived, another cabin filled, another story waiting to unfold. Racism didn't always shout. Sometimes it whispered across aisles, hid behind entitlement, and expected silence in return. Malik had learned something long ago. Silence could protect you, but truth could change the room. And sometimes, just sitting where you belonged was an act of defiance. He walked on, head high, knowing that somewhere above the clouds, justice was still a work in progress. But dignity, at least, was his to claim. Malik's ride arrived in a black sedan that smelled faintly of leather and citrus cleaner. As the driver pulled away from the curb, the airport faded behind glass and steel, replaced by long highways and billboards promising luxury, speed, and belonging. Malik leaned back, loosening his tie slightly. The confrontation replayed again, but this time it felt distant, like a storm seen through a rearview mirror. His phone buzzed. A message from his assistant. "Conference room is set. Board members arriving early." Malik typed a brief acknowledgement and slipped the phone back into his pocket. The meeting mattered. A potential merger, millions on the line. He had prepared for weeks, rehearsed every projection, every response. Still, the weight of the flight lingered, clinging to him like static electricity. The car stopped at a red light. Malik caught his reflection in the window again. A black man in a tailored suit, eyes sharp, posture composed. To some, that image meant success. To others, it meant suspicion. He wondered, not for the first time, how many versions of him people saw before they ever heard him speak. The building rose ahead, all glass and confidence. Malik paid the driver, stepped out, and straightened his jacket. The lobby buzzed with activity. Executives, interns, security guards, everyone moving with purpose, or pretending to. Malik nodded to the receptionist and headed toward the elevators. Inside the elevator, a familiar voice spoke. "Long flight." Malik turned to see David Klein, one of the senior board members. Gray hair, sharp smile, eyes that missed very little. "You could say that," Malik replied. David chuckled. "Air travel brings out the worst in people." "Some people," Malik said carefully. David studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly, as if understanding more than was said. "Well, you're here now. That's what matters." The doors opened onto the executive floor. The conference room was already filling. Malik took his seat at the head of the table, placing his notes neatly in front of him. As people settled, conversations quieted, eyes turned toward him. This was familiar territory. Here, he didn't have to prove he belonged. His work spoke loudly enough. The presentation began smoothly. Charts glowed on the screen. Malik's voice was steady, confident, persuasive. He answered questions with precision, dismantled objections with logic and calm authority. Heads nodded. Pens scribbled notes. Respect, earned and undeniable, filled the room. For a moment, the plane felt like another lifetime. After the meeting, as applause faded and chairs scraped back, David approached him again. That was impressive. He said, "As always." "Thank you," Malik replied. David hesitated, then said quietly, "I heard something on the flight." Malik raised an eyebrow. "Oh, my assistant was on the same plane," David explained. "She mentioned there was, an incident." Malik considered his response. He could downplay it. He could brush it off. He had done that many times before. Instead, he said, "Yes, there was." David sighed. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that." "So am I," Malik said. "But I deal with it a lot." David nodded, a trace of discomfort crossing his face. "If there's ever anything," Malik held up a hand gently. "What helps most," he said, "is people paying attention. Not just when it's loud." David met his gaze, understood. Later that evening, Malik stood alone in his hotel room, city lights flickering below. He loosened his tie completely now, letting it fall onto the dresser. The silence was thick, but not heavy. He thought of the woman at baggage claim, of her son, of all the unseen moments that shaped a person long before adulthood. He opened his laptop, not to work, but to write. He didn't know why at first. Words just came, about the flight, about the man who believed business class had a look, about the way silence from others had been louder than the insult itself. He didn't name names, he didn't dramatize, he told the truth. When he finished, he stared at the screen for a long time. Then he posted it. The response was immediate. Messages flooded in. Support, anger, gratitude, stories that sounded painfully familiar. People thanking him for putting into words what they had swallowed for years. Malik felt something shift. Not relief, not victory. Something quieter, purpose. The next morning, news outlets picked it up. Headlines danced across screens. Businessman speaks out about airline discrimination. A seat, a story, a system. Malik watched from a distance, careful not to let it consume him. Attention was fleeting. Change was slower. At the airport for his return flight, he moved through the terminal with the same calm stride. Different plane, same sky. As he boarded, a young black boy stared up at him, eyes wide. Malik smiled. The boy smiled back, gripping his mother's hand. They sat a few rows behind him. As the plane lifted into the air, Malik felt the familiar hum beneath his feet. He closed his eyes briefly, grounding himself. He didn't know if the world would be kinder tomorrow. He didn't know if the next flight would be easier. But he knew this. Every time he refused to move from a seat he had earned, every time he spoke when silence was expected, he carved out a little more space for those coming after him. Buff the clouds, the sun burned bright and unapologetic. Malik opened his eyes and looked forward, unafraid of the turbulence, certain of one thing: he belonged.